Hello YouTube, my name is Harveer and this is another HD Books video, and today I'm talking about my reading experience with Brandon Sanderson and how expectations have played into a lot of my takeaway opinions with his books. So if you watched my last video you can see how the setup has improved considerably. I'm pretty happy with what it's looking like right now, and I hope all of this goes smoothly. So with expectations, there are a couple things that go into this, and really they include Brandon Sanderson's publicity, for one. So, his lecture series, his podcast, his own developed fantasy con, his company, his publishing successes. I had learned about a lot of these things prior to reading any of his works. And so I had, expectations of a very notorious, in a good way, a very well respected fantasy author. And so I was looking forward to getting into the Cosmere and all of this. And I already knew I was interested in this space, right? And reading other books. And so I thought, with all of his publicity and the way he's very transparent and all with his fans and all of this, it really, it increases my expectations. And so beyond that, definitely online opinions and other booktubers that I've been following for a long time. I've learned some opinions from them, spoiler-free opinions about, oh, this is maybe where Brandon Sanderson hits his stride, and maybe this is where he's not as strong, and you ought to temper your expectations. So these come into play as well. Now you ought to say, like, okay, maybe I should always be trying to neglect these other opinions and try to create my own. And I should mitigate any sort of biases. And it is inevitable, is what I'll say to that. So I can definitely try to mitigate those, and I think I can get even better at doing so. But I think they're there, and that is the subject really of this video. Now, I started my reading journey with Sanderson, and the books I mentioned, if I don't have them in front of me, which are most of them, I don't have in front of me, they're back home, and I'm in an apartment right now, away from home. And if I don't have them in front of me, I'll just be, they'll be coming up here somewhere on the screen. And my first book I started with him was Elantris, and I had learned from various sources that, oh, Elantris is something lackluster, something where he's trying something out, maybe not his best day. And in fact, it's one of his earlier novels, right? And it's you should temper your expectations for that reason. And for going into the story with those thoughts in mind, really helped me to have a good time with it. I did not have a poor time with Elantris. I thought that the characters, the themes, and all that were fine. They were serviceable, but the world building, as I found out with other Sanderson books that I'll get into, was great. It was pretty cool, and I didn't really have any major complaints. I just thought it was fine. It was an average fantasy story, and I went through it with graphic audio actually, uh, and I've gone through some of his other works with the physical copies, and I think those things have also influenced me. And I'll talk about mediums for experiencing stories in the future and how that might impact me sometimes, but that's not really the topic of this video. Anyways, I then went into Mistborn Era 1, and I thought the first Mistborn book was fun. I think that's a great term to describe it, as a fun novel. This high style story, and you have this crew of individuals, and they have certain strengths and weaknesses. And I thought that the protagonist and the characters in general were likable. They were, you wanted to follow them and see how things went. The plot was not super tight. It was the pacing I thought was a little bit awkward at times and a little bit dragging at times, but his ability to really concretely explain that magic system that he came up with in Mistborn was just fantastic. The training montage and being able to follow along with the interactions between characters later in the story because we know how the powers work to some extent, all fantastic. So at this point, I'm having a great time with Sanderson's Cosmere. I go into book two of Mistborn, Wall of Ascension, and this is even better than book one. So I know that this may be a controversial opinion because I know some say that, oh, the first book or the third book are the best of the trilogy, but I actually like the second book the most. And I think a lot of it comes down to two things. So the crew is excellent as usual, but Vin and Alend as our primary protagonists, they just take a leap for me in the second book. I should also say in this video, I'm not really reviewing these books right now. I'm just kind of giving a general broad strokes picture of how I went through Sanderson's writing experience, and I took away from that what I did, and I'm not really honing in on any particular book. But anyways, with Well of Ascension, besides the character growth, the siege warfare and the tactics involved and the political factions and all of this, I just thought it was so fun to read about, and it was a step beyond book one for me. And so at this point, I'm just having a great time with the Cosmere, and I just can't wait to get into Stormlight, which I am not going to yet. I'm going to first finish up Mistborn because I've been told that, leave Stormlight till later. It's the magnum opus. Just get through his other works first. And I said, okay, I'll think about Mistborn first. But before I get into book three of Mistborn, I go to Warbreaker, and I have heightened expectations for Warbreaker as opposed to say Elantris because even though this is another standalone, and I know that he's planning Elantris too at this point, but anyways, back then, another standalone, but this is into his writing career. This is now he wrote this in between Mistborn book two and three, so I definitely have heightened expectations, and sadly, Warbreaker is a big disappointment for me. So all the Mistborn books I physically read, however, Warbreaker I listened to via audio, and oh man, the characters fell flat for me. The premise was interesting enough, and his magic system, as usual, interesting enough, but the plotting and the pacing, especially, a whole lot of nothing happening and just very uninteresting plotting in general. I'm not opposed to a slow burn. I love certain stories that have slow burns, but Warbreaker was just not it for me, and it was a big disappointment in my Cosmere journey. And it made me a little bit doubtful of things, but given the other stories I've read to this point, I definitely still feel good. And I get into Hero of Ages, and I think it's solid. I think it answers in a satisfying way a lot of the questions I had built up from previous books that he's posed to the reader. All of that wrapped up pretty beautifully, right? And characters all great. The problem with Hero of Ages I have is really about the scope of the story and how it changes tonally compared to the first two Mistborn books. And I liked that more intimate, lower stakes world building and tone of the first two books. I really enjoyed his writing with that and his execution, and I thought that the third book deviated too much from that and got a little bit too big. And you know, I know a lot of people love it, and I thought it was solid enough. It's just for those reasons it was not at the top for me. But I'm still having a good time, right? And now I get into Stormlight. So I get into his magnum opus, and I have huge expectations for Stormlight. I mean, you can't really, in multiple ways, right? This is his magnum opus, and the Way of Kings. He talked about Way of Kings Prime, and now and then I had the Way of Kings, and I might release the Prime version at some point. And the page count, the sheer page count, makes me think, okay, I am going to go on a journey here with these books, and I'm going to get a lot out of immersion into this world, investment into these characters. I'm going to get a lot of that. And The Way of Kings did not hit that mark for me. It did not, leave me after the book had concluded with a great ending. By the way, the Sanderlanche is definitely real within that book, but I had those emotional moments, like with the ending, as I was saying, the Sanderlanche, but the characters just did not stick with me like I might have thought, they would with with a 1200 1150 page book. And there are many other sci-fi fantasy stories of much shorter page length, a book length, that do achieve those goals for me. They have very interesting characters that you want to follow or you want to hate, and they have really cool world building, even better world building in my opinion than the Stormlight books, in a much more concise manner. And anyways, I do go into Words of Radiance because I have learned online the discourse that Words of Radiance is where Stormlight becomes the next tier, the next tier above, anything you have read. And I go into Words of Radiance, like, I mean, like the highest rated Goodreads book, right? At a certain point, I think I think when you think about the number of people rating it, it has the highest score given that threshold of people rating it. So I have huge expectations for Words of Radiance. I think this is where I'm going to take off with the Stormlight Archive. First 1,000 pages, I think, are much better than Way of Kings. I have a good time with it, and I'm really getting into it, right? And I still think that it's not worthy of that page count. I do not think it needs that many pages. But, in general, I am having a fun time with Words of Radiance. However, this is, at this point, reading Words of Radiance, this is when Wind and Truth came out. And the amount of backlash from booktubers that I was really looking to, right? Because their tastes match with mine for a lot of things, not completely, but for a lot of books, right? And the amount of backlash just really swayed me away from going forward. And I've decided to drop Stormlight Archive. I've looked at a few spoilers. I heard about a few spoilers with Brandon Sanderson's direction in Wind and Truth. And if you like the book, that's great, but I was not a fan of how he went about it. And so I thought, I'm not going to commit to these huge books if the ending is not, immaculate. Like, it's not really worth it for me from a time perspective, and, just getting invested into this world. I think about that for a lot of series. I mean, with The Wheel of Time, for example, Shadow Rising, The Dragon Reborn, with both of these books, which I think these are apt comparisons to Stormlight, because they're both sort of these epic fantasies, long books. Both of those I had a better time than with the Stormlight books. And I still think in general that books really need to earn their page count, and Stormlight did not for me. And those part of the expectations, besides the publicity of Brandon Sanderson, besides the online discourse, was the page count, right? Expectations from the page count, and Stormlight didn't deliver in that way. All right, so am I done with Brandon Sanderson on the Cosmere? No, because I think that his lower stakes stories, and being more intimate, like with Mistborn Book 1 and 2, even with Elantris, and with some of his secret projects I have not gotten into, I think I will enjoy those. I want to get into Mistborn Era 2 because I've heard about those lower stakes, maybe, and just in general, a more intimate story. I look forward to that. I think Sanderson executes that well, given what I've read, and I look forward to that. I've dropped Stormlight Archive, and I don't think I'll be coming back to it, but I definitely want to read The Emperor's Soul Um, so this is something that I'm going to put on my TBR. So the Emperor's Soul and Tress of the Emerald Sea. I have heard how these books have a different quality of prose that Sanderson doesn't have in his other novels. And I think Sanderson writes in a way that is accessible to a lot of people, and I think that's great, right? If that's what he wants to do. But personally, for my tastes, I do like more stylistic prose. I like varied choices depending on who's narrating and for what purpose. And I've heard great things about The Emperor's Soul, about Tress of the Emerald Sea, and I'm going to give those a read at some point this year, maybe, or next year. And I'm not done with Brandon Sanderson at all. And I think the way he's so transparent with his fans is just great. I'm going to make more content on Brandon Sanderson in the future for sure as I read more of his works. But with Stormlight and with his more grand stories and connections in the Cosmere, I think I'm probably done with those. All right, well, definitely let me know what you think in the comments, your reading journey with Sanderson. Are you not even starting that yet? Are you gauging how that will go? Are you in the thick of it? Are you done with that already and you want to, you're a veteran of the Cosmere and you want to explain how I might be, my habits may not be the best for consuming this story and this universe? Let me know in the comments. I that's the main thing I can look forward to is comments, right? And I want to interact with those comments. So I'll see you down below, hopefully. And this is HD Books signing off until the next video.